The interesting question when it comes to AI is not like, how do I make a workflow better, but how do I remove it? Ultimately, not using the tool or using it in very limited ways feels just more safe than throw everything at it. Let's figure out what happens, see where it breaks, be willing to see it fail, but that's fine.
Today, I'm interviewing my dear friend and colleague at Radical, Pascal Finette. Pascal is by far one of the sharpest thinkers I know.
When I speak to accounting firms, they're now coming to me and telling me, hey, my clients come to me and say, why do I pay all this money for you to do something where you just basically press the button and the AI does it for you? They're not wrong. I think this pushes us rethink some of the value we're bringing to our clients.
It's a really interesting time in the profession right now because if AI doesn't kill the billable hour, I don't know what will. Welcome back to the AI Native Accounting Podcast. I'm your host, Kacee Johnson, Principal at Radical and Executive Director of the AI Native Accounting Foundation. Today, I get to do something a little different. I'm interviewing my dear friend and colleague at Radical, Pascal Finette. If you have followed any of my work over the last year or so, you already know Pascal. If you haven't, buckle up because Pascal is by far one of the sharpest thinkers I know. He is former eBay, Mozilla, Google, and Singularity University. He's the author of Disrupt Disruption, as well as his newest book, Outlearn, The Art of Learning Faster Than the World Can Change, which we are going to get into today. Pascal, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Kacee, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
So before we get into the book, let's start with a little honest accounting, pun intended, on where things actually are right now and stand with AI, because I think you have a clearer view between the gap of the narrative and reality than anyone I know. So when you think back 5 years ago, what did everyone get wrong about how AI was going to land?
I think one of the main factors we got wrong, and quite frankly, I was in the same camp, was that we thought that AI will come for the routine work, the manual labor. It's kind of like a bottom-up thing. And I think the thing which surprised most of us is that it kind of flipped that narrative. It actually went first for the cognitive work, the real brain work, the white-collar work, the creative work. It kind of inverted the whole point. And I believe we assumed also that adoption would be hard. And as the tech raced ahead, what we found is that actually the humans and the organizations and the adoption of it becomes the bottleneck. So the summarization is, and you heard that term being thrown around quite a bit, and I think it's actually pretty accurate, is that when it comes to AI, we assumed it's a faster horse. It's kind of like the old thing, it's just better and more automatic and what have you. But it truly isn't a faster horse. It's in many ways, as we now see and understand, it's a capability shift. It's not a productivity feature. And I think that's probably the biggest thing we got wrong. And quite frankly, I was in the same boat there.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talked about that, about with adoption. And we see this at Radical as well as in a lot of the data that we share around the group. I saw McKinsey stated that they've got 72% internal AI adoption on their solution that they built, but that the average employee uses it once a day. And I remember we were on a call and a leader had shared that they had rolled out Copilot and they said, yes, we track usage. It's average 17 prompts a month. And both of us are sitting there is that enough? I mean, I'm curious, what do you think when you hear that? And what do you think is driving the low adoption, not in terms of implementation and rollout, but actual usage?
Yeah, and I think it's not a tech problem, right? The technology is there. It's if you have used one of the frontier models today for anything other than just as a better Google, you realize how powerful these models have become. I think it really comes down to behavior, individual and corporate behavior, as well as permissioning. I think we just don't know what good looks like. And most people just haven't given the permission, the air cover to figure that out. So the thing we did is we dropped the tool. We got the Copilot license, or we bought everybody, $20 a month subscription to ChatGPT. But we didn't really rewire the work. We didn't really look at the work and thought about how can we use these incredibly powerful tools, which are somewhat weird in their nature. Someone recently, not somewhat recently, but mentioned to me, AI stands for alien intelligence because it's this weird intelligence. It's very different to what we are used to. It's not like software, it's not like Excel or QuickBooks where you click a button and it does the thing. Ethan Mollick talks about the jagged frontier, this notion of like it can do certain things really well, it can't do other things. And it's kind of like this ever shifting frontier. And I think the challenge is to figure that out, you have to play with it. You have to, expose yourself to it. But in organizations, the reflex, the amygdala, the fight or flight part of your brain is this screams at you is like if I lean on this, if I do it and I do it wrong, I'm exposed. I'm, a failure. Like I get scolded. And so like ultimately not using the tool or using it in very limited ways, as in, hey, it helped me write an email, it helped me prepare a presentation, feels just more safe than the wild, crazy stuff you and I do, which is, just like throw everything at it. Let's figure out what happens, see where it breaks. Be willing to like see it fail and fail as, as me, as, I tried this process, it doesn't work, it like total catastrophe, but that's fine because you and I, like, we operate in this permission space, but many of us don't. And I think that's the big challenge why usage still is very low because people just don't know. They see it as it helps me write a better email, but they haven't experienced and haven't got textual understanding of what it can do.
Yeah, it's funny. I was in New York last week, a tech company that builds tax agents. It's called Blackboard. They were having their launch event, and I was on a panel, and this moderator asked me about change management. And obviously, we all know change. Just as humans, we don't like change. We're averse to it. And I was like, I think the problem is you're all looking for a training solution, and we're skipping for a lot of these accountants. They need context of the how and show me how these models got to these outcomes rather than just here's the outcome, because we're a profession built on trust, right? And everything is about trust. And you shared in a recent briefing some data, WalkMe data, and it was interesting. One piece that stood out to me and kind of relates to this change management piece, it was 9% of workers trust AI for complex decisions, but 61% of executives do. And when I was having this talk last week, I'm like, well, if the executives are the only ones that are evaluating the solutions and getting the demos and then making it and then shoving the AI down everybody's throat and just skipping straight to the training and don't over communicate and have the trust conversations, and it's just like, well, just trust the models and what's coming out of it. I mean, that gap is quite large. It's a 52-point chasm. Like, I mean, how do you think operationally an organization gets past that when, and it's to your earlier point too, we thought it was going to be the lower entry, just data roles that this was going to impact, when we're seeing the reverse.
Yeah, and I think the gap is the fact that as a leader, I'm ultimately not responsible for the usage of the tool and the outcome which comes from that, right? I mean, at a high level, clearly, yes, I am, but not on a day-to-day basis. So it's super easy for me as an executive to say, oh, I bought a Copilot license, declare victory, done, It's a very different story if I'm a frontline employee and I'm supposed to use these tools to enhance my work, to work better, to do new things. And, like people are not confident in their outputs. And partially that's right. Like you should be non-trusting of these systems because they're non-deterministic. They're still making mistakes. They still hallucinate. And at the same time, I think that the challenge is this gap in the learning. For me, like the biggest challenge with AI is that it is so easy to find a particular use case, create a nice demo around it, show you the demo, and you sit there and you're like, okay, great, this, like, it can do this thing. But again, like coming back to Ethan Mollick's jagged frontier, like AI is this very weird thing where it can do certain things really well, it can't do a thing which we would expect it to do. Because as a human, if I can do this, I can definitely do this. But then the AI falls flat on this face on like trying to do this thing. So there is a lot of like contextual learning an individual needs to figure out. And we need to create the space for them to actually even try these things and, waste an hour, quote unquote, waste an hour, like invest into learning ultimately, to try something, try a workflow, see if it works, tweak it. And if we're not doing this, I think the challenge is like on the front line, the people just don't know. They just don't know what these models can do. And one of the things I always tell people is, and I was just with a friend this morning, we talked about this, and he was working on a prototype to make meetings more efficient and better, leveraging AI. And I said, did you actually have a conversation about AI about this thing? Kind of like a meta conversation. And he looked at me and was like, no, never thought about this. I'm like, do it. Like, have this conversation, have the AI look at this, because it might come up with something very, very interesting. It might give you total garbage, right? That's the interesting trade-off. But as a default, I think we have to like use these tools and try them out and try them for everything and see where they work and they don't work. And again, like as an executive, you don't do this because that's not your job. Your job is not to do the work. Your job is to, manage and to keep the lights on. So I think that's where the weird gap comes from, because as an executive, all you see is the polished demo, and the polished demo always works.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that tension between optimization and experimentation, is really the heart of your new work, because the book isn't really about AI. It's about how organizations learn and how they don't. um, so let's get into it. Walk the audience through the series, because this is part of a larger series, and this first book and the 5 parts in it.
Yeah, so the very brief backstory is about 2-ish years ago. So as a follow-up to my first book, Disrupt Disruption, I was thinking about how do you create organizations which actually thrive in uncertain times, in turbulent times, under stress. And it's kind of funny because nature is that way. The reason why you go to the gym is you exert stress on your body. You literally break your body a little bit, and then your body gets stronger. In organizations, we don't do this. In organizations, we tend to be, at best, resilient. So I got really curious about how do you actually build organizations around this. And then I started writing the book, and I realized, man, this is going to be an opus magnus. It's going to be like 800 pages. Nobody's going to read it, like myself included. I don't want to write it. And it dawned on me that we're better off, and we're creating something much more useful if we're breaking this down into little mini books with centered around one central idea. And the first idea I wanted to explore, which is so acutely important in today's environment, is this idea of like, how do you actually learn? How do you create a learning organization? How do you create the conditions in your organizations for your people to iterate forward, to learn forward? And the reason why I think this is so important, and again, like this ties so beautifully into AI, is because we don't know. Like AI is a good example. It's like literally nobody can tell you where AI will be even in a year from now. So even, like Sam Altman and, anyone who's building AI will, if they're honest with you, they will tell you, I have no idea. So in an environment which looks like that, the only way you can, iterate forward is by like probing, by doing little experiments to try things out, to learn, incorporate those learnings, learn from the learnings, and then become better at every step. So essentially what we build is with Outlearn is a very concise, Monday morning actionable little book, which is super, super practical. You can read it on a flight. It costs you less than lunch. And hopefully it will change a little bit about how you see the world. And then, again, in the context of AI, I think it's incredibly helpful.
Implement on Monday, right?
Yes, correct.
So in approaching this book, though, you really did eat your own dog food and apply your DCLA to, you had this 600, 800 page, and you killed this original version, which, by the way, for the audience, detect, contain, learn, adapt. So you do this yourself. You break things and force yourself into the unfamiliar regularly.
Yeah, because A, I find it fun. B, I'm probably also not smart enough to really think things through. So I'm always like, yeah, let me just do things. There's an insight I got from a dear friend of ours who's actually also name dropped in the book because I learned so much from him. Tom Chi, he's the co-founder of Google X. He was the head of user experience over at Google X, the Moonshot Factory. And he pointed out that there's this interesting gap between thinking and doing. And a lot of people, because we have big brains, we think we can think through the problem and then we do. But we often then don't do. We think through the problem and eventually it doesn't go anywhere. But the really interesting learning is, and there's oodles of evidence for this, is you learn so much more by doing. So just like trying things out. Funny story about the book was, I had this like 600-page book in my head, and I started writing on it. And like there's like 100+ pages were written on this book. And I was like, yeah, I'm not quite sure if this is right. And I did the very uncomfortable. I called a couple of people in my network whom I thought would be the ideal reader for the book. And I said, please don't be friendly to me. Don't just like say the thing you think I need to and want to hear. Just tell me what you think. And I told them about the book, and they all said, yeah, this is great, Pascal. I'm definitely going to buy the book, but I'm not going to read it. It's like, I have no time for reading this. And it was like this moment where I was like, oh, dang. Because, at the end of the day, if you write a book, you actually want people to read it.
Yeah,
Less so
everybody's
than
used
just
to the
buy it.
TLDR now, and
Yep,
getting
exactly.
So you write in the intro that this is not a book about embracing failure. It's about engineering failure, that making it small enough to survive, fast enough to be useful, and cheap enough to repeat. For an accounting firm, which is our primary audience, right? A profession literally built around minimizing mistakes and risk. What does engineering failure look like for them?
I want to preface this, like, you have to absolutely see this in the context of your work, no doubt. So if you're an accounting firm, you don't want to experiment on doing a tax return and seeing if it works and then submitting it to the IRS and see if your client gets, away with it. No, definitely not. That being said, also don't use it as a knockout criteria, because I hear this a lot. People who are in regulated industries, accounting to a certain extent being one, like financial services, healthcare, etc. It is so easy to say, but we're in a regulated industry, we can't fail. And the point I want to make, though, is yes, that's true for certain aspects of your business, no doubt. But there's a ton of things in your day-to-day, in your job, in your role, like tasks you do today, where you can experiment until the cows come home. Simplest example, I was on the call with our accountant, literally like the accountant who does our books, and we were talking about AI, and we were talking about workflows, etc. And he told me that one of their clients sends them their accounting data in a very unusual format, because they're using this weird arcane system, which goes back to what God knows what, like the 80s, floppy disks and such. So they're still sending them this data in this weird format. And he said, like, man, I'm spending so much time like taking this CSV format, putting into Excel, like reformatting it so that I get it into our QBO instance so that I can actually run the books for my client. And it's like, have you actually experimented with like just vibe coding, like the idea of like I ask Claude or Codex or something to create a little script, a little piece of software which automates this particular fact? And he's like, I have never tried this. An hour later, he called me and he's like, man, you just saved me like literally hours every month, because now I've got this little Visual Basic script, which literally takes the CSV, reformats it, and exports it in the right format. And that, I think we can definitely experiment with. Like, there's so much in our day-to-day flows where I would really question. Like the interesting question when it comes to AI is, for me, is not like how do I make a workflow better, but how do I remove it? Like, how do I use AI in an interesting way that this workflow becomes automated, it becomes obsolete, it becomes completely done. And again, I'm not saying you should do your tax return with this, but there is so much surrounding work where we can experiment and we can like really trying to wire AI into our workflows to, build better pipelines, better internal tools, like create custom agents which do some of the work for us.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of the audience get slightly uncomfortable, when they hear the profession has historically rewarded like certainty,
Sure.
consistency, risk
Hmm.
reduction, et cetera. But um, in the book, you dive into the core theorem, and you explain that the speed of learning is inversely proportional to the cost of failure. When considering accounting firms and the conservative nature that is their foundation, and they do operate under client liability and, to your point, regulatory scrutiny, professional standards, et cetera, the incentives are almost opposite for them. So, and I do talk to so many firm leaders here today, and they're having to change the way that they think. So how are you talk with a lot of the same folks. How do you help them to reconcile that tension of they've been ground into their heads for some of these guys 40 years, and we're not in the same world. You've got to flip it on its head.
We're not, definitely. And just so we're clear, and you and I, particularly you, worked on an amazing piece of information, which under the banner of CPA.com, we're going to release on this idea of like build versus buy in this new environment. So everybody's like, bookmark this, come back to it. It's going to be released real soon. But the a couple points about this. First of all, you will see in the software packages you use today, a lot of these workflows will be an AI enhanced or automated because the vendors are putting it in there. And the vendors are doing a great job at doing this. So use it. The bigger question, and I mean, it's funny, I don't have an accounting background, and I've been, in the profession now for, I don't know, 8 years or so, kind of like pretty intensively with, thanks to you, with initially CPA.com, then AI CPA and SEMA. So I've been, in the profession quite a bit. And what I find so fascinating is for this whole 8 years I've been in the profession and like really deeply immersed in it, I have heard one argument over and over again, which is, oh, we need to get away from hourly billing. We need to get to value-based billing. We need to really we need to move up the value stack. We need to actually help our clients think about their business instead of just running the numbers for them. And it's interesting because I think that AI is going to turbocharge that. And we're seeing it. I think that's one. The other side is, and I know that you have the same conversation. When I speak to accounting firms, they're now coming to me and telling me, hey, my clients come to me and say, why do I pay all this money for you to do something where you just basically press the button and the AI does it for you? And they're not wrong. The client isn't
No,
wrong per se. And
yeah.
I think this pushes us to think about and rethink some of the value we're bringing to our client and how we think about this and how AI enables us to honestly also do, quite frankly, the more interesting work for our clients.
It's a really interesting time in the profession right now because you're right. First of all, if AI doesn't kill the billable hour, I don't know what will. I mean, that thing at this point, and it's not a direct quote, but something of Ron Baker said that it's like a cockroach that's never going away or something, and it's so true. But it literally operates against the whole foundation of how a firm has engaged with their clients. So they have to change at this point. And I'm sure that they already have started thinking about this, but I'm curious, is there because, and you and I have had this discussion because we get a call about working with a client and it's something about fee pressures, but we internally have to ask the question, well, what is the firm fundamentally going to do? Who is the firm fundamentally going to be? Not just how it operates, but what it even sells in the future. And that's the bigger, more interesting conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And funny for me, like this goes back to my first book, Disrupt Disruption, where we kind of unpack this whole disruption thing. And like you can make the argument AI is disruptive, whatever. Like I hate that term because it's so overused. But in the book, we have this model to think about disruption, where we talk about disruption being what we call a state change. And the basic presumption, like assumption of that is that, and I keep saying this also to practitioners in the profession, when you look at the job to be done you're doing for a client and you really peel the layers, you realize pretty much nobody wants to have an accountant because they want to have an accountant. They don't even want to have an accountant to necessarily get their books done. They want to have an accountant to, like sleep better at night, to, pay the minimum amount of taxes, to be compliant, whatever like the particular reason is why you engage with your accountant. And it's a multitude of those, of course. And the interesting thing is when you study any disruptive scenario, you realize that the job to be done, the underlying job to be done, the core essence of what you actually do for your client, or a product does for their customer, that doesn't change over really long periods of time. So my invitation for someone in the accounting profession today is to really think hard about what is the problem you're actually solving for your customer, and how do you solve this in the future, where maybe some of those things will be automated, some of those things will be done by an AI. And I guarantee you will get very quickly to an answer which gets much more towards you become a trusted partner for your client. You become actually much more of like a consultative approach to your client. You really help your client think their business through, to optimize their business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, rather than I run the books. I'm like, I make sure that your ledger is balanced. That arguably already isn't necessarily anymore the case, because you use a product like Digits today, and I have no problem with that anymore because the machines are doing a lot of that work.
And it does raise the question. It was funny, again, last week when I was at this event, one of the other speakers was saying that we need to have more conversations, and to your point, like be advisors and help them understand their numbers and everything. And I kind of pushed back on her at dinner and said, well, the problem is that you're still delivering those reports that are at a static state. Eventually, fintech solutions are going to be delivering not just what happened in the past, but future looking. And it's going to go directly to your client's email before you, the CPA firm, ever pick up the phone. That completely changes the value prop for the firm.
Mhm.
How do you then approach your client if the technology is giving them all of the data and the explanations? Because it is becoming very not just predictive, but prescriptive as well. So then what do you do then? It's not just a conversation of here's your stuff and this is what it means anymore. Eventually it's going to be, it's already delivered to them, and it's no longer looking in the past, it's looking forward.
Yeah, and I think this is where I think the real opportunity lies, quite frankly. If you're living in a world where, I give you a simple example, different industry adjacent. You can today, and I'm not sure you want to do that, but you can today hook up your all of your financial accounts as an individual to ChatGPT, and you can get, like ask ChatGPT, like starting to do like financial analysis. Give me information on how do I best invest. Is my portfolio balanced? All of that stuff, and because it is tied into your accounts, and it pulls the data in life data essentially. It can do so on a continuous basis. And it can, to your point, it will eventually become proactive. It will eventually tell me on Monday, hey, you just got this check for $5,000. I know that you don't need it at the moment. Like, you don't need the money. Like, why don't you invest it into this particular investment thing? And I think the same is in many ways true for the profession. You want to actually be much more embedded into your clients' day-to-day processes. And once you are in there, you can actually do things proactively. You can actually call your client. I'll give you a simple example. We have a very good relationship with our accountant. Hi, Brian. Love you. And, Brian calls me. Brian is like, hey, we've got this thing here. You want to look at this? And that is the value. This is where I'm like, I'm happy to pay you money for this, man, because that is the value. For me, the value is not for him to do my tax return and my, K1s and what have you. Like, that's fine. Like, I need that. And if Brian does this like completely with a machine and it's a perfect tax return, I don't give like two craps about that. But if Brian starts calling me or emailing me and helps me run my business better, or saying, hey, I just saw you did this thing here, like, let's rethink this because you can probably write this off better. And I was like, whoa, this is, that becomes really crazy, and that becomes a real opportunity. So my invitation for everybody in the profession is really see yourself much more as a trusted partner, and think about how do you get deeper into the relationship with your client, because that is the defensible position.
I want to get back a little because I love that you brought up other industries, because I do think we get so bird's eye view and we don't look really at any of the macro elements happening, and we can learn best practices from what's going on in other places. And in the book, you talked about the optimization trap. I want you to tell the eBay example, and then I've got a question about what it means about broader leadership. But if we'll walk the audience through that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So this goes back to eBay. This, now I'm starting to date myself, but this is eBay literally in the year 2000, 1999. I was there at eBay, and if you go back in the annals of history, you realize that in 1999, eBay had a big outage. eBay literally site collapsed for more than a good 24 hours. Very painful. This is early days e-commerce. Lots of e-commerce goes through eBay. It created this environment where the leadership of eBay, Meg Whitman, like they wrote this like public apology letter, etc. And what happened at eBay was it became very risk averse for good reasons, right? Like there's a definitely reason. It's a little bit like NASA, after like one of the disasters, like you become super cautious. And what happened at eBay is that they deployed a software deployment schedule, which basically ran on a quarterly schedule. We called this the train system. So every quarter, we rolled out new features, and we made sure that these features were always like bomb-proof, tested, etc. One of the weird side effects of this basically was, by the way, when you looked at the bug account, so the software bugs we tracked, they kind of stayed constant for 11 weeks. And then a week before the rollout, they dropped dramatically. Not because we solved them, because we needed to hit the numbers, and then like you close out all the bugs, which are kind of like somewhat obscure and hard to reproduce. So like your bug number closes. And then of course, like a week after the rollout, like they all come back because eventually the bug will bite you in the backside. That's the one side of it. Then there's a whole different company called Shopify. Shopify is an online sales platform, somewhat competes directly with eBay. And Shopify has this other mantra. They release software every 90 minutes. And they build a system where they basically say, if it doesn't hurt, like you're not pushing hard enough. And what they've done is, and this is really clever, to minimize the impact it has on the business, because they clearly don't want to roll something out and breaks like Shopify and like, everything goes down. They created a system where they could roll this out to a very small amount, like each change goes to a small amount of customers. They test it with those customers. If it works for them, it gets to a slightly larger amount, and so on and so on. And then, eventually, like a couple of days later, as this transpires through the system, you have it in everybody's pocket. And the important bit here for me is that if you do the math on this, so Shopify launches literally like a new feature every 90 minutes. They have 1,400 in 1 month, in 1 quarter, 1,400 more product launches than eBay. eBay has 1, they've got 1,400. And the thing is, like the learning you get from this, the velocity you get from this just is insane. And it compounds, because the next quarter you've got another 1,400 and eBay has 2. And the next quarter, eBay has 3, and you've got another 1,400. So it's massively compounds. And I think there's something about this, which is the idea of can you test something with a small subset of your customers so that you contain the blast radius, so you're not like destroying your business by testing something. But how do you create this cadence, this rhythm, which allows you to try things faster? And like the challenge is, I think there's a leadership challenge, which is we train our people to report back the green status. In the book, we talk about this idea of like the occurred to me one day that there's something in the real world called a watermelon. It's green outside, but it's red inside. And that's like a lot of the green status. When you've ever been in a meeting where people are like, you go around the meeting, it's like, are we green? Are we good to go? And everybody's like, green, green, green. And you're like, I always wonder how much of those are actually watermelons. But because we punish people for like, like anybody who stands up and says like, no, no, we are not ready yet. Like, we scold them, etc. So
Don't rain
there
on
is
our
a,
parade. We're marching forward. Yes.
yeah, exactly. So there's a piece in there, which is for me is like getting to this discipline of trying things out, allowing yourself to learn, making sure that these failures, quote unquote, become learnings and they're not, destroying your business, but they're like little hiccups. No client, I guarantee you, no client, if you like send them a wrong email once and you apologize afterwards and you say like, dang, I'm so sorry we sent you this thing, like it's totally fine. So there's a little bit of like a little bit more risk taking, a little bit more appetite, but it allows you to create a significantly higher velocity. And that is, I think it becomes incredibly important.
And you do note to in the book that the cost of experimentation has dropped by a massive factor. So the number of experiments organizations should be running should increase proportionately.
Absolutely, and you and I we're privileged to be on an AI working group with a lot of vendors and some firm leaders. And in one of the last calls, I recall this very vividly. One of the vendors told us a story where they said, "Listen, like we build a prototype now in 2 hours, and it's kind of like maybe not even functional, but it allows us to show you something instead of just talking about something." And AI is really good at that stuff. So this ability to like very quickly go from thought to something which is tangible, not necessarily perfectly built, scalable, secure, audit proof, all that kind of stuff, but something which I can touch and I can feel, I can play around with, is just incredible. And it allows us to like, again, like increase our learning just manifold.
So what do you think that leaders are still getting wrong about how organizations and their teams actually learn? Because you went through a lot of and you give many different frameworks in the book and ways that people can play with this.
Yeah, I think the main challenge is that we think about learning as an input, as a, like you create, like you learn something and then it's being codified. And then you take it and the codification like then leads to now we create a training or we create a deck or we put it into an offsite or whatever. When really it's about loops. Like you really need to rethink about this idea that how quickly and how many times can you cycle through a loop where you go from idea, test, learn, and then, like that learning leads you to a refined idea. You test it and you learn it again. If you can run this loop really fast, again, like our friends from Shopify, 1,400 times every month, which is bonkers. There's a reason why Shopify is now the largest e-commerce site on the planet, independent e-commerce site, like not Amazon. So I think that's for me, it's like the main piece. And then the challenge there is that from a leader's perspective, there's a very interesting challenge in terms of like how we talk about failure, which I find like there is a judgmental piece. Like our initial instinct is like, one of our people comes to us and says like, I tried this, I failed. It didn't work. If we say what went wrong, which is a very natural, like seemingly, easy way to say this, but the challenge with that is you create this reaction where someone immediately feels on the back foot. If I come to you and say what went wrong, you be immediately like, oh no, nothing went wrong. It's like, Joe in accounting like screwed this up, or Jennifer in marketing, or whatever, or the market, or the customers are too stupid to get it. And instead, what you want to do is you want to get to verdict. So instead of verdict, you want to get to data. So you want to get from like what went wrong, you want to get to, okay, cool. What does the data tell us? Like what have we learned? Like what's the data show? Right? Like you change immediately, like the narrative. You get away from punishing the messenger, and then you get to this point where, as I mentioned earlier, like this phrase I got from Tom Chi over at Google: insight leads to action, much less so than action leads to insight. So like this notion of like getting, like doing things, learning things, incorporating them into your next prototype and iterating yourself towards the place you need to be.
I love it. And I have to say one of the things about the book that I love so much is also just about the same thing I just love about you is that in the way that you approach life is that it's practical optimism
Mm.
and not blind optimism. So
Yeah, no, of course.
you're not saying move fast and break things. You're saying, hey, the cost of learning has fundamentally changed and organizations need to adapt to that reality. We're all living in it. So last thing before I let you go, because we always do a rapid fire, just kind of short answers, quick takes. Big four. Will they be leading adoption or disrupted?
Both. I think there's it's not necessarily a threat to the big four because their big moat is scale. Um, I think the real disruption happens when like a 5 people team starts to disrupt a 50, 100 people company. That's the big disruption. The big four, they're fine. They will do their thing and they will, at the margins, they will get disrupted. There's no doubt about it. But as a core, I think scale becomes their moat.
Most dangerous assumption that people are making about AI right now.
Seeing it as a productivity tool, seeing it as it makes my thing 10 to 20% better instead of rethinking my business. Because the first sounds and feels safe. The second one is where the leverage is.
100%. But I just wrote about this in the briefing, right? But what's more difficult, Pilates reformer or climbing?
Workout wise, Pilates reformer. I have been very, very sore doing Pilates. Mentally, definitely climbing, but workout, no doubt, Pilates. If done right, it kills you.
Some of the mountains you scale, they scare me, but good for you. So now I know in the last year you have gotten a lot of exposure to country music concerts. And aside from Steven Wilson Jr., are there any country artists that have won you, or is Jane winning you over? Or any country artists that stand out that you actually enjoyed?
Oh man, this is the question where if I answer it wrong, my wife will kill me. So, no, I enjoy live music. I enjoy Steven Wilson Jr., who's very non-country and very weird and edgy. Country music is not my forte, but I do enjoy just like the fact that it's live music and it's performed really well. So we've seen a lot of country music concerts, but it's not my world. My world is I grew up in Berlin in the 90s. So if that gives it away, I'm grew up in rave culture, so electronic music.
And last question. So, you've traveled all over the world. You know, I continuously always go back to Hawaii. That's like my place. Is there anywhere that you would go back to time and again?
Yes, anything with a really, really steep mountain and lots of them. So my recent discovery and love is the mountain ranges in Canada around Calgary. So the Banff region is Canmore, particular, is like a tiny little town there. Is just spectacular. Canadian Rockies, unbelievable.
And that's saying a lot. You live in the Rockies. So, all right. Very good.
Not the Canadian though, so
Yeah. Well,
different
Pascal,
scale.
thank you so much. The with the amount of overwhelm that I just hear consistently over and over,
Yeah.
the real question moving forward is whether organizations know how to learn fast enough to keep up with the environment that we're all operating in. And I think Outlearn reframes that conversation in a way that's practical, not theoretical, which I know is always very intentional for you. So, congratulations on the book and thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me. This was a great conversation.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the AI Native Accounting Podcast. You can stream all of our episodes on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast platform. A special thank you to our founding sponsor, Digits. If you would like to learn more about becoming an AI native firm, visit digits.com. And until next time, stay curious to stay ahead. Thanks.